Well, it's 3 p.m. on Thursday afternoon here in late September. I'm Nicole Hodson, Executive Director of the NANP, and I'm just absolutely delighted to be here today with Lewin from Dry Farm Wines, who have been incredibly gracious to help us put together something that's just for fun. Well, for fun and education, we'll put it that way. And, we thought that it would be a wonderful opportunity for us to do something social with our members. In light of the fact that we can't all be in the same physical location, we can at least have a little taste of wine together and welcome fall, which is my favorite season. And so I hope that all of you that are there have your bottles of wine that you ordered from Dry Farm Wines and your glasses so that you can experience the tasting here with us today. I did want to show you the cute little glass of wine. One of my employees gave this to me a few years ago, and it says, this is the line for a good day, and this is the line for a bad day, and right up here is the line for a don't ask. So I'm going to be tasting one of the wines with my favorite little wine glass here today. So again, I want to thank you, Dry Farm Wines, for being here with us. And with that, I'm going to introduce to you all Monica Nesbitt. She's our development manager. She put this whole thing together for us. So Monica, take it away.
Thank you. I put this together because I really like drinking wine. I wanted to share that with everybody. So anyway, so I'm going to read a little bit of information about Lewin, who is going to be our taster, educator, wine person extraordinaire today. So from childhood, Lewin fostered his love for wine and food while growing up on an organic farm in Vermont. After moving to California to pursue his dreams in the wine world, he met Todd, the founder of Dry Farm Wines. Lewin and Todd quickly realized their similar passion for cooking, wine, and a well-contemplated life. Lewin was the first official Dry Farm Wines office employee and the originator of the wine program. Yay, Lewin. Since, Lewin has led sourcing these beautiful wines from farmers all over the world and has spent much of the last 5 years meeting with winemakers overseas. Lewin passionately ensures the highest quality wines are accepted and shared with Dry Farm Wines members and is excited to extend this to NAMP members. Lewin, thanks so much. Take it away.
Wow, quite the introduction. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. This is exciting. We have 3 amazing bottles of wine to taste today. One French, one Austrian, and one Italian. We're going to go through them. There'll be lots of time for questions. I'm going to share my screen here as well. We're going to get started. Lots of time for questions. I'm going to go through some basic information for everybody to kind of get acquainted with Dry Farm Wines, who we are, what we do, the wines that we offer, and all those kind of sorts. To start off, if you want to open the first wine, it's the white wine, the Fianno, actually. It's the tall, skinny bottle. That's what I have right now. I want to have something in our glass while we're chatting. Makes it more fun. And so, yeah, feel free to ask questions as we go. You can put them right in the chat here, and Monica's going to send them over to me as they come in. We'll also have time for Q&A at the end as well. So kind of go through it and enjoy, and let us know of anything that comes to mind. And certainly how the wine is as well as we're diving into the white. We're going to taste through the rosé and the red about midway through this in just a couple minutes here after we get through some of the basic information to better understand the layout and what we have here for the wines. So cheers to everybody. Just want to start off with the basics here. Dry farming, what's in the name? We are, of course, Dry Farm Wines, and the basic idea of the dry farming aspect is crucial and pivotal to why we are kind of named this. And really the basic idea is that when a vine traditionally goes in the ground, in the new world and in more of the commercial world, it's immediately given water. And what that does is that kind of forces that vine to stay on top of the soil, typically in about the first 3 feet of that soil, of the humus, and you don't really get a lot of that mineral depth that's down below that humus level. And so you can see this vine on the left here is kind of an example of this this irrigated vine that's given water. And then on the right here, you have these vines that are going down deep into the ground, and they're getting their nutrients, and they're getting more feedback, and they're having more interactions with that soil. And that's allowing that vine to pull up and have more interaction with that ground to give more feedback and more stimulus, more input to the vine, of course, but then by default, the grape as well. And with that, you get a grape that has a better sense of place. You have a grape that has a more unique kind of expression of the terroir, as is French saying the terroir, which is the culmination of all of the environments that are impacting a vine. And you have really just a better identity of that grape and of that wine. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about what happens if you have these beautifully crafted, organic, dry farmed grapes, but then in winemaking, you add all these additives to them and chemicals, where you then kind of, as you can imagine, lose that sense of place. But the basics here, dry farming is a rather simple and very ancient technique that encourages and really allows the vine to express its natural tendencies and to dig deep into the soil, essentially. So giving it kind of more feedback. Most of Europe does dry farming. You'll see a lot of the New World places that do kind of more the conventional irrigated farming. Most of the very hot places, California, where I'm located, a lot of it in Australia, will be doing this non-dry farming. They'll be giving water to the vine. Very hot places. Some places in Europe, they actually ban it. They make dry farming the law in order to call your wine a specific kind of region. So if a wine says Bordeaux on it, it has that appellation name, it has to be dry farmed. It is, the government demands it. They take this so seriously. Same with Burgundy. So France is very specific and strict about this. Austria, there's a little bit more irrigation that's happening, but you see from different kind of perspectives around the world how they take this dry farming aspect to mean different things. So it's really an interesting point. Let's see. Next, I want to talk a little bit about these commercial wines versus the dry farm wines, natural wines, which is very important. I'm going to take a little wine break here. How's the wine doing for everybody? The white that we have, if you are joining me on the white, it's a Fianno, which again, we're going to talk about all these wines a little more depth, but yeah, if you have any questions while you're tasting as well, feel free to shout them out. So just some notes here. I'm not going to touch on all of these. Feel free to read through, of course. But the one that I want to speak on is the additives. As you can see here, the FDA approves 70 plus wine additives, some of which can be toxic. They're known to be toxic. The FDA has even kind of limits and requirements as far as when you can add them, how they can be added, whether it be at the bottling phase or in the wines themselves. Some of these things include sawdust to make a wine more tannic. Letting a wine sit in an oak barrel is very time sensitive. It's just takes so much, and time is money, as we know. So people add sawdust to make a wine tannic instead of letting it sit in an oak barrel, which is very expensive and takes a lot of time. You can add all sorts of dyes, thickeners. Mega purple is a common one that makes a wine darker, has a darker color, gives it a more kind of thick textural taste to it, and it's essentially corn syrup, sugar. It can be beet sugar, it can be whatever. There's really no rules on it, which is the scary part. So at dry farm wines, we don't have any of those additives. There's dyes or colorings or things that could be in wine, and we don't necessarily know what all of those additives do. The FDA doesn't know what they do, but we do know that when you remove all of them, you get a cleaner, pure, more healthy, kind of honest wine in general. Man, that's good. So might as well remove all the additives and you have a kind of a more clean, focused aspect to it. I want to touch on farming here for a minute as well. A lot of the commercial wines are using glyphosate. Glyphosate is a common weed killer. It's certainly in a lot of vineyards all over California, all over Europe. Some places in Europe are working to ban glyphosate and Roundup Ready crops. But it is not banned in all places, and France uses this GMO chemical weed killer commonly. It's kind of, there's some confusion about that in general. People think that it's Europe and they don't use any of these things, but it really is quite common. And so our grapes, dry farm wines, are all either organic or biodynamic practices, and both of those do not allow any of these weed killers. And really, biodynamics, which most of our growers are at least going in that direction, even if they're not certified, is really about what we can put back into the soil and how we can help the land be regenerative, how we can help the land be at a greater level next year than it was today. There's this, term, as we mentioned, Monica mentioned in my introduction, I grew up on a farm in Vermont, so I'm very passionate about farming in general. There's this catchphrase called sustainable, as we all know. We've seen it all. And well, one of the big things about sustainable is that if we were to sustain ourselves as we are now, we would just die a slower death. Our environment would go downhill. And so we actually don't want to sustain, we want to be regenerative. We want to bring more bees, bugs, birds, plants, flora, all of this energy of the natural world. We want to bring that back into the land and to make the land better for the next generation. These vines can be in the ground for 50, 60, 70, 100 years in many cases. And so when you plant a vine as an individual, you're probably not going to be seeing the kind of the benefit of those vines in the ground. It's going to be for the next generation. So you really have to have the long-term approach in mind there. The average lifespan of a vine in Napa Valley, for example, is 19 years. And you can kind of get an idea of where their goals are. 19 years, you can get your money back. You pump it full of chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides and water, and you get this big fat grape in 5 years, and you can make wine out of it for about 15 years, and then it just is so overwhelmed. It's like this vine is on life support, and it collapses. So it has no ability to kind of be alive and sustain itself. So it's a really important aspect to think about farming, and all of our winemakers. One of my most proud moments and aspects of dry farm wines is that we're really encouraging a better way of soil and of the land. I see we have some questions coming in.
Yes, Lewin. So we have a question from Barbara, and she really wanted to know what kind of competitors you have here at the present time in the U.S. And then I have one more as well.
Yeah, that's great. Good question. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of the trend towards clean wines these days, and people use different terms to associate with kind of what these things mean. We use the term natural wines because our big inspiration is raw wine, Isabelle Legeron, and she has used this term natural wine. She's not the creator of that term, but it really gets to the core of what it means to be natural. But we also go beyond that, and we define very specifically, which we'll get into our criteria: organic, dry farm, native yeast ferment, low sugar, low alcohol, low sulfur. So all of those things that we do, we have not found anybody that does all of those things. There are some people that they get wines that are low in alcohol, or they are all organic, but nobody that we have encountered in the market, and we welcome healthy competition. We haven't seen anybody that does it in the full extent of this, of what we do, and the extent that we go to actually lab test our wines, because our wines are lab tested to be low in sugar, low in alcohol, and low in sulfur. And we have a certified enologist here in Napa Valley that we use to test all those wines. So
great.
There's people doing similar, but not the exact same thing.
Thanks, Lynn. So the other question was, what does biodynamic mean? And we had actually had a attendee respond that it deals with planting around the moon cycles and healing the soil with many methods, which I think is actually correct. Maybe you could expand on that a bit.
Yeah, certainly. It's a great question too, because we all have this idea of organics. It's the lack of chemicals, fertilizer, pesticides in the farming of a specific thing. And so organic in that sense is kind of what you're not doing. It's allowing nature to take its course in that way and to kind of step back. But what biodynamics does, it takes it a step further, and it thinks about exactly as that other person mentioned. It's about using nature's natural inputs to make the land better and to make it, as I mentioned before, kind of this regenerative model. So you're looking to increase the life matter in the soil. The humus, as I mentioned before, it's that, it depends on where it is. It can be 12 inches, it can be 36 inches below the surface. And that is really where a lot of this life force is contained. And so biodynamics really looks at creating a complete ecosystem around the vineyard. So they'll have cows, they'll have chickens, they'll look at the cycles of the moon, which impact the tides, it impacts grapes, it impacts the sugar levels in grapes. And so it really looks at more of the holistic, bigger picture around growing something and incorporates that into creating a better grape, a better product in general, and a more holistic kind of overview of everything, rather than just saying, I'm not going to add chemicals, and I'm also going to look at the bigger picture around us. So
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the questions. That's great. Okay, the last one I'm going to touch on here is sugar. If anybody wants to hear about anything else, let me know, and I'm happy to talk about it. But sugar is an aspect in wine that's very common. It's very hidden. You oftentimes don't taste it. You don't see it. Wines can be labeled dry, and they can have considerable amounts of sugar in them. You know, Ménage à Trois is one brand that is here in Napa Valley, and not to, you know, degrade them in any way, but it's just their style is that they have a red wine that has 9 grams per liter of sugar in it, and that's a style they're going for. However, due to the labeling laws, the wine does not say anything about sugar on the bottle. It says dry red wine, and it has 9 grams per liter of sugar in that wine. So that's an amazing thing to me, that you can have that, first of all. And if somebody has any sort of, you know, personal dietary restrictions they're on, maybe they're diabetic, maybe they're following a ketogenic diet, what have you, this is really important to know. And so for dry farm wines, all of our wines are lab tested to be less than 1 gram per liter. So 1 gram per liter is the maximum. And because a bottle is less than a gram, that's 0.15 grams per glass or less. So really looking at reducing the sugar. One of the important kind of things to note is people often think, well, how can you have wine that has no sugar in it if grapes have sugar naturally? And these are a natural wine, right? As dry farm wines is. Exactly. So what happens, maybe some of you are familiar with the fermentation process, but in fermentation, you have yeast that consumes sugar, and in the yeast consuming that sugar, you get the byproduct of alcohol. And so we allow, our winemakers allow the native yeast and natural yeast that is inherently present on the grapes and in the cellar to consume all of that sugar that is in that grape juice, and it turns it into alcohol. So you get a naturally sugar-free wine. And sometimes winemakers kind of stop that ferment while the sugar is coming down and the alcohol is going up, but it still has 4 or 5 grams in there. And you can stop that fermentation to get a sweet wine, but our winemakers allow that sugar to keep going down and that alcohol to keep going up. But the key there is not to pick your grapes with so much sugar that the alcohol is going to be at 15, 16%, because certainly wines can be oftentimes in warm climates, New Zealand, Australia, California, a lot of the New World, South America, they can be 15% alcohol. So our farmers, our winemakers pick their grapes at kind of lower sugar levels, allow them to ferment completely. And then with that, you have completely dry, sugar-free wines. It's a beautiful thing. There's a lot there. I can go on for hours about any of these topics, but if you have any questions, of course, shout them out. Let's see. Let me go into our criteria here. We've talked about some of these things. Now, talk about dry farming. It's a very kind of important component. All of our wines are dry farmed, organic and biodynamic as well. All of our wines are following these practices in the farming aspect. Sometimes it goes beyond that as well. In terms of kind of regenerative farming, biodynamic with, you know, additional looks towards regenerative long-term approaches. So there's many different variations on what organic and biodynamic can be. Another aspect is native yeast fermentation. I touched that on a moment ago with the sugar. And what's really important here is that we are looking at all of the fermentations to happen without the addition of any yeast that can be added. Now, it's very common to get GMO yeasts and added yeast packets, just like you would get at the store to make bread. They have the same thing to ferment wines. And sometimes these wines can be, or these yeasts, I should say, to ferment the wines, can have flavors of banana that can be engineered to give certain flavor profiles. So that's a really interesting aspect on the native yeast being also a more true reflection of where it comes from. And you can have yeast added that will give a totally different kind of a totally different flavor profile, structure, aromatics, and all these things. So we allow the full natural yeast fermentation to happen. We have another question come in asking so low sugar means higher acidity. That's a great question. So yeah, as the sugar goes down, you're going to be, raising the alcohol up, and the acidity level is really dependent on how much acid you had in the wine, or sorry, in the grape originally. And if you pick a grape at a certain acid level, and it has that acid there, but you have some sugar as well, you're not going to taste the acidity. Just like when you make lemonade and you have lemons, of course, and you add sugar, and the amount of acid, the amount of acidity in that lemonade still remains the same, but the sugar can kind of hide it. They can kind of cover up that acidity. So winemakers play with these things. You'll see in Riesling a lot. It can have a lot of acidity, more acidity than anything else would, but it can have a considerable amount of sugar to it, 5, 6, 7, 20 grams of sugar. But because of that acid, you don't notice, you don't kind of actually feel the acidity there. And we do have some Rieslings that are fermented completely dry, and they have no sugar at all, less than a gram per liter. But yeah, it's an interesting point. Acidity and sugar can kind of play off of each other, and they can mess with your palate, which is also why we lab test, because we can't trust our palate to determine these things. We have to lab test for alcohol, sugar, and sulfur, because our palate can play tricks on us. Another thing that could affect kind of the mouthfeel and structure is the tannins. Tannins, many of us notice in red wines, they kind of have this grippy feel, and they can hit our gums, they can hit our cheek in very different ways, and they can give that perception of a very drying sense. So chocolate has tannins, tea has tannins, black tea especially. If you ever oversteep a black tea bag specifically, you'll get this kind of tannic taste to it. And so it's really important to keep these things in mind. It's all relative. These are the last 3 points there is alcohol and sulfur, which I haven't touched on yet. But all of our wines are 12.5% alcohol or less. And that's because we really love to drink wine, as I think everybody in this call does. And we like to drink, 2 glasses, maybe 3 glasses, maybe a bottle on a Friday night or whatever it may be. No judgment, depending on when you like to drink your wine, and have a bottle. And so with the lower alcohol aspect, you can drink more of it and enjoy the taste, enjoy the kind of community that you have around the dinner table, enjoy the meal more, and not feel the effects of alcohol so much. Still wake up refreshed. You feel a cleaner buzz as well. You feel kind of this cleaner energy that comes to the mind. I certainly notice that with our wines, that I sometimes have 15% alcohol wines that I love to taste and experience them, but I can't drink very much of them because I just feel this heaviness from the alcohol that hits so aggressively. And also with lower alcohol wines, you typically get a cleaner profile in the wines. You're not getting as much of this tannic structure, this extraction from the skins of the grape or the oak barrel. So it kind of keeps this cleaner, more pure, elegant style of wine around in general. So it's a very interesting thing. If anybody has any questions on the criteria, feel free to shoot them out as well. There's lots here. Sulfur, I want to talk about sulfur a little bit. The limit that we have set is 75 parts per million or less. Now, most of our wines are about 25 to 40 parts per million. Now, sulfur is naturally occurring. All wines have sulfur. It's virtually impossible to get a wine that has no sulfur. It can be occurring in wines 20, 30. I've heard of wines having 50 parts per million natural sulfur without the addition of any. And sulfur really adds kind of more, I want to say consistency to a wine, and allows it to be shipped, in a container, and then once it gets to us in boxes across the country, to arrive at your door in a safe condition. So that's a really important thing for us to have a little bit, just enough to protect it and to preserve it, but not enough so it's going to sterilize the wine. The legal limit in the USA for sulfur is 350 parts per million. That's typically used in sweeter wines in general, but in dry wines, you see levels at 100, 120, 150 and all that. So too much sulfur can really deaden a wine. It can make it flat, and it can kind of limit its vibrancy and its energy overall. So that's a really important factor for us to keep that sulfur at a manageable level overall. Let's see. Talked about fermentation. And let's see, health-wise in sulfur, it's tricky. There's a lot of evidence, research out of the UK specifically, that indicates that sulfur is limiting our ability to process alcohol. And so it interferes with the body's natural kind of breakdown and metabolization of alcohol. So if you have sulfur that's too high in wines and you are drinking a significant amount, it's different for every person, of wine, that it can really kind of slow down your body's ability to process that. So drinking lower sulfur wines, I certainly notice this. Personally, I feel better, I feel cleaner, and I can certainly recover from that better if I'm staying up a little later and waking up a little earlier, as we often do on these wine sourcing trips in Europe. And so sulfur can interact with that aspect of your body's natural way to do it. They say about 1% of the population actually has an allergy to sulfur. There is more sulfur in any dried fruits or potato chips or orange juice than there would be in most wines. So typically, if people think they have a sulfur allergy, it's generally it's not actually sulfur, it's going to be something else. But just because there's still sulfur in so many other things, you'll see it in a lot of dried fruits, prunes, plums, that kind of thing. It'll say sulfured or unsulfured on the bag. So sulfur is not the worst thing in the world. It's necessary, but just like alcohol, just like sunshine, just like anything, you have to have the right dose of it. Dosage matters. It's kind of one of our mantras here at Dry Farm Wines, is that we really want to limit the exposure to these bad things. Alcohol is a toxin, and that's why we limit 12.5%. We still love alcohol. We still love to drink it. We love its effects. We love the connection that it brings to people and to a dinner table. We want to make sure it's at a manageable level. And somebody had a question, that is the sulfur in our wines naturally occurring? So naturally occurring sulfur can be up to about 30, 40 parts per million. Our winemakers add a little bit more. They can add a little bit more. They don't always. In order to protect that wine, depending on so many things, but the variables that go into that is essentially kind of the yeast nutrients, how stable the wine is, how what the chemical compound and makeup. You need to have a certain amount of nitrogen in the wine that will protect it and keep it secure. If you have a certain level of acidity, then sulfur can help protect it from changing or evolving too much. A lot of our wines is a living product. If a wine has a lot of yeast to it and it's unfiltered, then maybe they'll add a little bit more sulfur to knock back that yeast so it doesn't re-ferment in the bottle. So we've certainly had that happen with wines coming from Europe, where we'll get it after buying it, tasting at a wine fair in December or January, and then it shows up at our doorstep in May or June, and we open it and it tastes like a lightly carbonated sparkling water or soda or something like this. It has those bubbles there to it, and that's certainly not what we wanted. It's not what most of our members wanted. So having a little bit of sulfur added to that wine helps keep it more consistent and limits that re-fermentation that can happen in the wine, essentially. So, okay, we're gonna go on a tasting here. I'm gonna get my palate wet, white wine's good for.
So Lewin, I just wanted to comment that already we're getting many comments about the white, how great it is. So,
oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it seems like everybody likes it. I know I do.
Well, let's hear. We're gonna, just because we're on that right now when we're tasting it, I'm just gonna jump to this slide. It's a couple slides ahead. I'm gonna go back, but the white that we all have in our glass is the 2019 Casa Dibal Fianno. Fianno is a native southern Italy grape, Campania, which is the region this wine is from, is in southern Italy. It's a coastal, very warm climate, very temperate, a lot of olive oil, olive trees, vegetables down there. And this is, even if it opens up in your glass, you'll notice, I'm noticing at least for the bottle that I have, that it's really becoming more vibrant, more floral, more white fruits, more peachy aspect to it. So really a fun wine. We're gonna come back to this, but just wanna kind of just talk a little bit basically about kind of how to taste when we take that for granted. And it can, certain little things can help experience a wine in a more authentic way, it can elevate it a little bit. You know, when I go camping or don't have a wine glass nearby, I love a little 8-ounce mason jar to drink my wine out of. And that's totally fine. Tastes, you know, 80%, 85% the same. One thing to keep in mind here is that when we do pour, I always like to pour maybe 3-4 ounces. This is about a 3-ounce pour because it really allows you to swirl, to aerate it. Now this wine has been in this bottle for 8 months or so. It's been trapped in, and it's been on a long journey. It's come from Italy all the way over here, and for some of you all around the country, then it's been packed into a box and shipped to you. So opening it up, letting it aerate can really help the wine express its true authentic self. You know, swirling it is a great thing to do. You can also, if you have a decanter of some sorts, you can use any clean vessel, preferably, you know, glass, something that's clear so you can kind of see the color of the wine as well. You can use a 32-ounce mason jar. You can use a coffee decanter, a coffee French press, as long as it's really clean. And it really never hurts to aerate a wine, so don't be afraid of doing that. It's really only going to make it better in 99% of the cases. So we swirl it to aerate it. Smell. One trick when you're smelling wine is actually, you know, to keep your mouth a little bit open. So rather than closed, just keep it just so a little bit of air can get through. And actually you want to slightly exhale through your mouth, because it kind of creates this very gentle way of releasing this air out of your mouth, and it kind of allows you to smell very gently through the nose. If you smell too intensely, you won't be smelling the subtleties of the wine. So open your mouth, nose to your glass, and just gently breathe out. Breathe in, and you'll notice a very subtle aromatic to it. Breathe in, and you can put your nose to the glass, and you can actually inhale through your mouth as well, and that'll kind of create a little airflow as well. So just smell and think about it. My nose is personally stronger than my palate. I rely on my nose more than my palate, because my palate can get tired. It can, you know, it depends on what you ate that day. The nose is more kind of always fresh. It's always kind of new and ready to go. And whereas the palate can get, you know, affected by the spicy, you know, salsa you had for lunch, or what the coffee you had, whatever it may be. And so I rely on my nose a little bit more. Beautiful. Smell again, notice it open up, and then of course it's always time to have a good slug. I aerate it in my mouth as well, so you don't have to. A lot of practice over the sink with water. It doesn't dribble out. We had a question come in, but what if I don't drink all the wine that I aerate it? Can I go back in the bottle? It's a great question. It absolutely can. My suggestion is that if it's maybe, you know, you have 4 people and 4 or 5 people, whatever it may be, more than 1, more than 2, and you are going to drink the bottle pretty quickly, it's great to aerate it and then to pour it out for everybody. But if you're not going to be necessarily drinking it all right away, you want to aerate it, get it to the right point of where you want it to be, and you can smell it, you can notice it change, and then you can pour it back into the bottle and kind of think of that bottle as that seal, that capture there. Now there's such little space on the neck of this bottle that if you open the bottle and let it sit on the counter, for the amount of wine that's in here and the amount of tiny airspace that's in the top is really not going to impact, it's not going to aerate the wine that much. So you really want to get this wine out of this bottle if you're going to have an impact on aerating the wine. So don't think that just leaving it in the bottle is going to aerate it that much, but you can certainly put it back into the bottle. Sometimes you may notice a little bit of tartrates. It kind of looks like crystals inside of the wine. That is tartaric acid. It's completely natural. It's totally fine. It means the wine was not filtered. It means it didn't get cold stabilized to allow those tartaric acid crystals to fall out of solution. Winemakers will let a wine go to kind of 33, 34 degrees for 5, 6, 7 days. And that can pull that tartaric acid out of there. Sometimes if a winemaker didn't do that and the wine got cold or it just settled out, you'll see the little sediment in the bottom of the glass. It's totally fine. You can kind of sacrifice a little bit of wine, half an ounce, and swish it around in the bottom of the bottle and dump that out. That's a great kind of way to aerate your wines. There's a difference in tasting and drinking. Drinking is something we do maybe when we've had that very long day, and as Nicole was saying, when her glass is filled to the top and it says "Don't ask," that's a different kind of day. But when you've had a really good day and you want to have a really good bottle of wine, there's so much in a glass, there's so much in a pour, there's so much to think about, and it's not about getting it right or wrong, but it's really just about allowing your mind to open up to think about what could this smell like. Maybe it smells like honeysuckle. Maybe it smells like your shampoo that you use. Maybe it smells like a cool summer stream. I know, growing up in Vermont, you get these rivers that are in the summertime. They're very damp and cool and misty, and that's kind of the smell of minerality, where this river mist is coming off of the rocks, hitting the rocks and coming off, and that kind of reminds me of minerality that I think this white wine has really well. So we're going to be tasting these other two wines here. Most of us have the white in our glass, I believe now, but the white is the Casa Dibal Fianno. So we're going to talk a little about pairings as well. Just to keep in mind, pairings are a tricky thing because there's no right answer, and there's a few wrong answers, but as far as what is going to not taste the best, it doesn't mean you can't explore and try it and get more knowledge and insight and continue to build up your own repertoire of what goes with what. People that are really great at pairings, sommeliers in restaurants, that's really what they specialize in. They keep the basics in mind, which we're going to go over, and they have a lot of personal experience to refer to. There are very few examples of perfect pairings. Maybe we've heard of Caviar and Champagne. You have this saltiness of caviar that works really well with the acidity of champagne. Champagne's extremely high acid wine. You don't necessarily notice how high acid it is because oftentimes A, it can have sugar, and then B, those bubbles kind of disperse that sharp, strong acidity across your palate, so you don't get that intense acidity overall. But when food pairing, we want to think about the things that either are in kind of tandem with the wine and the food, or things that are kind of opposing and opposite. And so for this Fianno, the Casa Dibal, we want to think about things with this good acidity, got this good floral component, and we're going to think about pairing something that complements that. So one thing that would be really good with this is goat cheese. This has a kind of a fruitiness to it, a good acidity, and some really kind of bright freshness to it. So goat cheese salad of some sort would be fantastic. Keep in mind, salad can be a difficult pairing because, especially if we're having a high acid salad dressing, the high acid of the salad dressing can be a difficult component to pair with the high acid of the wine. So I want to keep that in mind overall. But it can certainly be done in the right component. Maybe you have a salad dressing that has more olive oil and salt and doesn't use acidity as much, and it uses the acidity from the goat cheese to give that salad more flavor. And I think this wine would be exceptional with it. Something else with this, halibut, any sort of white fish with lemon, but lemon, that you kind of cook that down a little bit with some stock or broth in that white fish, and it softens up that acidity. You still get the lemon flavor, but it's not so heavy. So there's kind of two things: white fish and a light lemon caper broth dressing. Goat cheese would be great. You could do herb salad. I love dill, parsley, and you can do cabbage or kind of some crunchier greens. It's a great pairing with this because they have a lot of flavor by themselves. They don't need a lot of dressing, and they're very simply dressed with some salt and olive oil. And a wine like this would go really well with that kind of aspect. Of course, as I've mentioned, and I will mention again, if anybody has any questions on food pairings or any of these topics, feel free to jump out. You can see here on this wine specifically, the sugar is 0.3 grams per liter. So there is effectively no sugar in this wine. Total SO2, and as we put here, total SO2 sulfur. There is the measurement of total, which is the overall component of sulfur in the wine. It's a total measurement. And there's also the free component. And that's a very interesting, it's a very, I heard from that some of you are into the science and you can get a little nerdy with it. So I'm going to dive into this real quick. But basically, there's two different measurements of sulfur, as I mentioned, the free and the total. And you think about the total, whereas if you take, you're making lemonade and you take sugar and you were to pour sugar into that lemonade and you were to stir it up, and some of it would dissolve and some of it would still be on the bottom of the glass, that it didn't stir in completely. Well, the total sulfur measurement, think of that as the total amount of sugar in that lemonade, and think of the free measurement, the free sulfur measurement, which we don't list, it's not as important for us, is just the part that's in the bottom of the glass. So just the part that's not in solution, it's free from the solution. And so that's the difference between total and free, and it's an interesting thing. You'll see it in some aspects, but almost, you know, dried fruit, potato chips, they are measured in the total parts per million of sulfur, ppm, as we can see here. Okay, we're gonna move on away from the white, unless anybody has any questions on the white, but we're gonna move on to the rosé otherwise.
Sorry, we're good to go, Lewin, yes.
Great. Okay, 2019, Domaine Jourdan, La vie est belle, life is beautiful, that's what that means. Domaine Jourdan is in France. They are in Loire Valley, which is a region north of Bordeaux, south west of Paris by about 3 hours, easily accessible by train, also of course by car. It's the biggest wine region as far as land mass in France that's continuous. You have regions like Beaujolais, which are much smaller. So it's really got a lot of land to it. They grow in Loire Valley, where Chinon is located. They grow all different kinds of wine, sweet wine, sparkling, red, white, rosé, sparkling rosé, everything. It's an immensely diverse region, and it's really exciting for that reason. You see typically Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon a little bit, a really great grape called Grolot or Grolot. You also see Gamay grown there, and you also see Melon de Bourgogne. And that's Melon de Bourgogne makes Muscat, sorry, Muscadet. Muscat, I was going to say, is a different grape altogether, but Muscat and Muscadet are two separate things. But yeah, the region of Loire Valley is quite large. Some of my favorite wines in the world actually come from Chinon, France. This rosé is 100% Cabernet Franc. See the sulfur on this is 23 parts per million. Now my guess would be that this winemaker did not add any sulfur, and that 23 parts per million is the naturally occurring sulfur that is in the wine. If we smell it, we get, oh, there we go. We get this sense of herbaceousness to it, for me at least. If anybody has any comments on the kind of tasting notes of the wine as well, feel free to shout them out. There's no real right or wrong. Everybody has their own experience, and certainly we all come from a certain background. A really interesting thing about tasting notes is that as we talk about them in the US, we have these certain links and connectors to tasting notes based on our own experience with food. Well, if you go to a different culture, China, Singapore, Morocco, wherever it may be, that has a different set of food, they would describe the exact same wine in a very different way, with very different foods in mind, with very different flavors, different spices, different ideas. And it's just a reminder to me that there is no wrong answer when discussing a wine, its pairing notes and its tasting notes, because it's so individualized to each person and to each different kind of experience we had. Sometimes people say a wine can smell soapy, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it reminds us of, you know, the soap that we use in the shower every day, and we don't even think about it. But there's this connection, this link there. So 100% Cabernet Franc, which is of the grape, the most common grape of Chinon, France. Food pairings for this wine. Classic for this style of light wine, if you wanted something a little bit richer and fuller, You could do a light grilled sausage, something a chicken sausage. I wouldn't necessarily do pork. It can have a little too much fat there, but a leaner sausage as well would work. Something else is gazpacho, that fresh tomato, herbs, olive oil, really beautiful freshness to that as well. Also light and salty cured meats. And by light, I mean kind of lighter in color because they have a softer flavor as well. Something like prosciutto. I wouldn't do, one of my favorites is bresaola. It's air-dried beef. I wouldn't do something that's as dark with that because that bresaola or, you know, darker salamis, even pork could be a little bit too heavy for this. So something lighter like prosciutto would be great. Somebody asked, is rosé just for warm weather? And it was just for summer. A lot of people think that, and we certainly, in kind of a US marketing sense, we're told from all different angles and approaches that rosé is only to be consumed in warmer weather and, you know, from the months of May to September or whatever it may be. But absolutely not. I love rosé all year round. And granted, I know I live in California and it is pretty warm and lovely here all the time. However, you have something, you know, it's midwinter and you just want to have a bright, fresh herb salad, or you just want to have even a lighter soup. Sometimes soup can be, you know, chicken soup can be rather light and not have a lot of very big, heavy, rich flavors. So you having a big bowl of chicken noodle soup or broth-based soup that's rather light. A red wine would be too rich, tannins would be too heavy, but a white wine, you might lose some of the chunks of herbs that you get in that soup, or the things like that you would otherwise lose out on. So I love having rosé all year long, depending on what kind of food it is. And certainly as an aperitif, instead of a white wine for an aperitif. It's really great. And a lot of rosés can certainly age. This wine, La Vieille Belle, can age for probably 2 or 3 years, no problem. Rosé is not known for aging that well. And while it's not necessary, this wine certainly could. So don't worry on letting that age a little bit. So yeah, beautiful. Cabernet Franc, you'll notice the classic aromatics here are showing through. You get a little bit of this pyrazine, could be green pepper, capsicum, and so almost this sense of asparagus to it as well, and that's classic of Cabernet Franc. It's a really traditional aromatic smell to it. So somebody asked how long the skin's on this wine. I don't know specifically on this wine, but from my knowledge in Cabernet Franc and winemaking and all the things, it looks like it was about 4 or 5 hours. Cabernet Franc is a darker red grape, but it's not as dark as Syrah may be, but it's not as light as Pinot Noir or Grenache, essentially. Essentially, it depends on how thick the skins are, how much color pigmentation they have, and that will impact the color of the rosé that comes out with how much. Kind of think about steeping a tea bag. The longer you steep that tea bag, the darker the tea is going to get, and that happens for red wines and also for rosés. So kind of an interesting fact there and component. Somebody else said that they typically don't like rosés, but this is fantastic. Well, thank you. We think so as well. This rosé, you know, is there something different about this rosé from others? It's a great question too. A lot of rosé that we're used to, and again, I mean the American market and me as well, before I was in the wine business, is coming from Southern France. Within that, or at least inspired, I should say, by Southern France. If it's not coming from Southern France specifically, but within that, you're getting a certain style and flavor profile from those certain wines, and so you can have these more fruity, kind of sweet floral aromas. It's coming from, what is it? Grenache, Mourvèdre, Carignan. These grapes that are from Southern France. And even if the wine is from the US or it's from wherever else you might get your rosé from, Morocco, they have a lot of wines from there. You'll be getting the similar grapes to be used to make rosé. And so if you're not used to drinking Cabernet Franc rosé, you can get this kind of really exciting, more savory aspect to it, which is what I love about this wine. It's not just pure kind of like gummy candies, essentially. And sometimes rosé can taste like Jolly Ranchers and gummy candies and all of those things. Not that maybe many of us eat gummy candies on this call, but nonetheless. It's a really fun wine. You'll notice in this one as well, as it opens up, it really has a lot more on the aromatics to express itself in. Okay. On to the last wine. It's exciting. Red. I'm sure everybody is a fan of red. Most people are. We have a screw cap here. Just a real quick, because I haven't opened the bottle yet. The official fancy way to open a screw cap, it's kind of a tricky thing because it doesn't have this fancy aspect to it. But compared to a cork or whatever else, sometimes even the pop top can be fancy, a champagne cork. But with a screw cap, the official fancy way to do it is to grab it by the base. So don't grab the top. Don't grab it like this. Grab it by the base with your forefinger and thumb. Hold it at the bottom, and you just twist it, and the top comes right off. Kind of the more elegant way to do it. Looks fancier. Had to come up with some way, Okay. And here we have the 2019 Judith Beck Inc. Judith Beck is a winemaker. She's in Burgenland, Austria, one of my favorite regions in the natural wine world, one of my favorite regions in Austria, certainly. It's really a region that has so much natural wine in it, so many natural wine makers all around. It's kind of the home of natural wines in Austria, and certainly in Central and Eastern Europe. Burgenland, south of Vienna, by a little over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes south of Vienna. This 80% is Veigalt, which is a classic Austrian grape. It's kind of the red grape of Austria. And Saint Laurent, or Saint Laurent, as it's mentioned here, 20%. That's kind of similar to Pinot Noir. Think of Saint Laurent as similar to Pinot Noir. There's lighter style to it. You can see the stats in this wine: very low sulfur, very low sugar, very low alcohol as well. Diving into the aromatics, yeah, really bright, vibrant. I want to talk really briefly about closures, screw caps versus corks versus, you've seen maybe crown caps that kind of look like beer caps on them. There's a lot of concern in the world that I've heard is that we shouldn't be using cork for wines because the cork forests are disappearing, and the more we use them, the resources are going to be gone and the forests are going to be gone. Well, that's totally not true. In fact, there's great information on YouTube about this. There's a great talk about somebody about the cork forest, and a cork tree regenerates itself every 7 years. And the more you harvest, or the more that you sustainably manage that cork forest, the more it actually gives back to you. So it's a regenerative tree, and you can harvest the cork off of it many times. It's the bark off of a tree. It's extremely light. And so workers of all ages and kind of strengths can work in these cork forests, and they do. It's typically a family operation. The cork forests, which are around the Mediterranean basin, are home to the third largest biodiversity of any forest in the world. The Amazon and I forget the other one, but anyways, immensely diverse forests of wildlife. So we want to keep the cork forests around. They're immensely helpful for the environment. Of course, we know the importance of trees and of sequestering carbon out of the environment to create a healthy world. And the more that we harvest this cork, the more those trees kind of thrive and survive. And it's a really amazing thing. Screw caps is really a decision of the winemaker. It creates a different idea, for the wine. It's not as elegant, but it's easier to open, of course. So I know if I'm going out to the beach or a picnic, and I am grabbing a bottle, I'm going to look for a screw cap just to make sure it's easier and don't have the corkscrew or can't find it or whatever it may be. You don't have to worry about it. Leave it in the car. So it's also cheaper having a corkscrew. So sometimes that wine, they've put more energy into the wine itself, which I love. If somebody wants to not pay the middleman, pay the guy that's making the label, or pay the guy that's making the closure. They just want to have a consistent, clean, easy, reliable closure. Screw cap's the way to go. It doesn't really age that well traditionally. The screw caps haven't really been around that long, so people don't really know how well they age. But the wines that are in screw caps are typically meant to be consumed in the next 2-3 years, and most of the wines at dry farm wines have the same idea. to them, because we want people to be enjoying and drinking, and you know, they don't need corks in them, but they certainly, that's certainly fine. With a crown cap, you've seen this on pet nat, on sparkling wine sometimes. It's becoming more and more popular. It's even less expensive and less intrusive than a screw cap. It has, you know, the screw cap here has this foil in the bottom, then it also has this, but the crown caps that come by, they just really have this top piece. You pop that off and you can have this very minimal waste, essentially. So they're all very, very interesting in that aspect of the screw caps, corks, and then crown caps as well. All very different. And again, there's some really great YouTube videos on the sustainability of cork forests. If you look up sustainability cork forest YouTube, it's a fascinating video. Back to the wine at hand, Judith Beck. Somebody mentioned they love the color of this wine. Absolutely. It's got beautiful, this kind of garnet, fading, slightly oxidized color to it. It's a little bit savory, like some meatiness. Almost get some jerky, but not this sweet teriyaki, but more just like this pure meatiness to it, which I love. A little bit of darkness, maybe some blackberry, black fruits, plum skins could be there as well. But more of a blackberry. It has this dustiness, this earthiness, dusty earth aspect to it. Sometimes I have memories of, you know, picking blackberries off the side of a road. It's a little bit too close to the dusty dirt road, and they can have this dustiness to them as well. If anybody has any tasting notes on that, we'd love to hear those as well. You know, it's interesting. You get this wine that has a darker color, has this kind of darker nose and aromatics to it, and yet it's got really soft tannins. It's quite soft, and it doesn't have this big heavy punch to it. And that's that little bit of Saint Laurent that we see here. As I mentioned, it's similar to Pinot Noir. It's kind of a lighter grape. It softens up the wine. It makes it a little bit more vibrant and dynamic, and it's not so heavy. So this really, you know, as most of our red wines are, most of our wines in general, actually, they're going to be a little bit fresher, a little more vibrant, and not kind of so dragged down, essentially, overall. Pairings in this wine, you know, something like a pork sausage would be great. You could do simply seasoned and cooked chicken thighs, because they have a little bit of fattiness to it. This wine has some good acid and a little bit of tannins. So you want chicken thighs have a little bit more of that fattiness in them that can pair well with these tannins. One really amazing thing that I thought of for this, as I was thinking, you know, before we got on here, was miso. I'm not sure if anybody uses miso paste, but you can take bok choy and spread miso inside of the bok choy and grill it, or grill the bok choy and then spread miso inside of it after you cut it in half. And you have these channels and grooves, and the saltiness of that miso would go really well with the acidity of this wine. And you have that vegetable is really the vehicle for that miso. And to bring that charred, crusty miso into it, the savory aspect of that miso would pair really well with this. And the salty aspect is good with the acidity of the wine. So eggplant's another great vegetable to do miso with. Somebody had a question about wine glasses. It's a great question. I personally have one wine glass that I use for all my wines. It works 99% of the time. I've never had a wine that doesn't work in that aspect. If you want to get very, very specific, then maybe having a different glass would express that differently. I relate it to, if you're a professional race car driver, you might notice the different brand of shoes that you're using in order to make that car drive better or have a better driving experience. But I've been in the wine business for, I don't know, 10 years, and I don't notice it in the glass. I think it's a very, very specific thing that really doesn't matter. And I actually like having a consistency to a wine glass that allows me to know how wine tastes all the time in a pretty similar wine glass. This happens to be from Riedel. It's very basic. It's designed for Zinfandel and Riesling, actually, but I love it for all-purpose general. It's nothing fancy. Very, very simple. We're about to wrap up here. But you know, most of us think everybody here has 3 bottles of wine open in front of them. And you're probably thinking, gosh, I guess I have a lot of drinking to do tonight, which is great if you decide to do that. But also, if you don't want to drink all of these wines tonight, I want to talk briefly about storing the wine to be consumed later on. First thing is to just reseal them with the closure they came with is best if you can. Otherwise, any cork will do, but preferably use the cork that the wine came with. And all wines, whether it's red, white, rosé, sparkling, anything, store it in the fridge. When it's cooler, the oxygenation effects are limited and it does not get oxidized as fast. The enemy of wine in this case, in the short term, is oxygen. And if it's sitting out at room temperature, it'll be exposed to oxygen a little bit more. If you have a red wine and you put it in the fridge, you may not want to drink it when it's that cold because tannins can be a little bit too heavy when a wine is cold, a red wine is cold. So bring it out to room temp. And then once it gets up to room temp, about 55 degrees, maybe a little cooler than room temp, 55 degrees is, then it's perfect to drink. But just store it in the fridge. You know, with whites and rosé, they can be at fridge temp and you're good to go. They can last for 1 to 2 days. You can easily go 2 to 3 days in some wines. And the thing to keep in mind is that it's never going to be harmful. It's never dangerous to drink. It really just depends on what tastes the best. The only thing that's going to happen is to a wine after some time is that it's going to lose its vibrancy. It's going to lose its pizzazz and its zip. So if the wine doesn't taste like it's really got a lot there, then maybe it's time to open another bottle and make a stock out of it, make a reduction, whatever it may be. But taste it, rely on your palate, rely on what your nose says, what your palate says. Somebody asked, should I always pair fish with white wine? Great question, and absolutely not. If you have a light red wine, awesome with swordfish. Swordfish is a much richer fish, has a lot of fattiness to it, typically can stand up to kind of richer flavors. I love a really good Dijon mustard and swordfish, and you certainly want a little bit richer wine there. And so you can do a Pinot Noir, a Saint Laurent, a Schiava, a Gamay, a Gros, whatever it may be. These are all some of the grapes that we work with here at Dry Farm Wines, our winemakers work with. So certainly you can mix it up. Some white wines are really heavy and rich too, and they can pair with that. But experiment. There's really no wrong answer there. If you're having a, mustard, red wine vinaigrette, that's going to be a hard thing to pair wine with. Maybe have something else at that point. What should I drink with duck breast? One of my favorites. You know what? This is Veigalt. This Judith Beck would be a fantastic pairing with duck breast. Typically, if you go with Pinot Noir, that's great. If you have the opportunity to get 100% Saint Laurent from Austria, that's an amazing wine, amazing varietal. That would be really good. So with duck breast, it's not super fatty. It's pretty lean. You have some gaminess to it. So you want to have a wine that doesn't have a lot of tannins to it, and really goes in that elegant, leaner side. So Pinot Noir or Saint Laurent is a beautiful option. One last question here that we have. If I open a wine and it starts to taste like vinegar, should it be thrown out? Only if you don't like it. Personally, I don't like wines that taste like vinegar, but if you're enjoying it, then drink it. But really, it's up to you. It's not going to be harmful to your health. You could use that wine in cooking if you wanted to make coq au vin, a classic French dish. That's a great wine to use in that aspect. Cooking wine is certainly applicable. You can also always freeze your wine if you want to use it for cooking. I wouldn't never drink a wine that's been frozen, but if you want to cook with it after, that's a great thing to do as well. But yeah, I don't love wine that tastes like vinegar. So if it does have that, then maybe get a new bottle. Okay, well, I feel like we've done a crash course in all of the wines of the world here and had a taste, smell, spit, sip, and pair with food. So thank you so much. There's a penny bottle link for you all that you have access to. Monica and Nicole can get that for you if you don't have it. And one last question that came in: can you order these wines from DFW? You can order them from us. I'll have to check inventory. It's constantly changing. Our typical order volume that we buy from the growers is very small and it goes out the door very quickly. So they're constantly changing. But if you see any of these wines and you pull it out and you say, I love the La Vie est Belle Rosé, can you send me something similar? We'd be happy to do that. If you love the Fianno, we can send you something similar to the Fianno, and we can work with you to get something that works well for you, or anybody that you recommend to dry farm wines as well. So thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. It's simply an honor. Nicole, take it away.
Lewin, I just learned so much. I thank you, especially for me, I'm a foodie. So when you were talking about the food pairings, that really spoke to me. And thank you for answering the question about fish, because I've gone round and round with a few people on that one. That I do think that there's some flexibility around pairing fish with, a good bottle of wine of any kind. And so thank you so much for this, the time that you put into being with us. I love the package that I got. The 3 bottles are phenomenal. And thank you for talking about storing them and, how we can get the best out of them. I hadn't thought about cooking with a bottle that wasn't quite up to snuff anymore, but that's a great idea. So I'm definitely going to put that to use if I don't get to all of my open bottles. Yeah. And so I know that we're going to have a link for you all for the penny bottle deal. And I'm really, really hoping that we can see you all, Dry Farm Wines, at a future conference in the future when we can all be together again in person. We would love to have you all there and to be able to enjoy some more beautiful wines with you. So Monica, thank you for putting this all together. Lewin, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Absolutely. I
had a blast, and I'm sure glad we got started late in the day, because I think I'm done working for the day.
Hey, and Nicole, I would just like to say that I am a member of Dry Farm Wines, and I've had some really fabulous wines over the past year or so delivered to my home in Indiana, which is not a wine capital. So it's been great, and I just am so delighted that we are partnering with this company. So, and I also am glad that we're done for the day, because this was way fun.
Love it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll be sending out the recording. So if there's anything that you wanted to hear again, or if you'd like to share this information, certainly feel free to also share this information with your clients. If you have clients who are trying to avoid sugar, if you have clients who want to enjoy a good glass of wine, or they want to cook with wine, this is a wonderful option. So thank you all, and have a wonderful Thursday evening.
And if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to service@dryfarmwines.com, or me personally, it's Lewin, Luen, @dryfarmwines.com. We're here to educate, we're here to share, and we're here to get people drinking delicious wine.
Ah, wonderful. Lewin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you all. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Ciao.